I stared at the odd hole that appeared in my arm overnight. It was located on the inside of my forearm, just before the bend of my elbow. I'm positive it wasn't there when I went to bed last night. How can I be so sure? Easy, because there used to be a mole where that hole was. It's like the mole collapsed in on itself and became a hole. I couldn't tell how deep it was. All I could see was the rim of the skin around it and the blackness. There was nothing else. No blood, no tissue. Nothing but an endless black void. I probed it with my finger and expected it to be sore, but it didn't hurt at all. If you saw how deep it was, you'd think my entire arm would be in pain. The hole was the same shape as the mole it replaced, and it was about as wide as a pencil. There wasn't any blood that I could find on my clothes or sheets. Whatever made it, did it without breaking any blood vessels. Since I wasn't in any pain, and the hole didn't look inflamed or infected, I was going to wait and see if it could close on its own. Once I decided that, I jumped in the shower. As I washed my arm, I noticed something that alarmed me a bit. All the water that flowed into the hole never filled it up. That's not possible, right? It would eventually fill with water, right? It didn't, though. That unnerved more than I cared to admit, so I finished washing and quickly got out of the shower. After seeing the amount of liquid that poured into my arm, I couldn't stand to look at the hole any longer. I covered it with a small bandage, then got dressed and ready to go to school. Before I did that, I gave my forearm a little shake to see if I could feel any water sloshing around in it. I couldn't. I did the best to ignore the hole and was doing pretty good until lunch. When I started eating my sandwich, my arm started to feel wet. I glanced down and noticed a small stream of water flowing out from beneath the bandage. I quickly ripped off the bandage and couldn't believe my eyes. The water was streaming out of the hole. I used the tip of my finger to plug the hole and get the water to stop flowing. It worked, but as long as I kept it there and pressed my finger to it. Since I didn't know how to get it to stop, I walked into the bathroom and held my arm over the sink and let the water flow down the drain. After a few minutes, the water eventually slowed to a trickle and then stopped altogether. I returned to the table, sat down. After I glanced around to make sure no one was watching me, I grabbed the straw from my drink cup and placed it over the hole in my arm, then let it slowly push into the hole. I wanted to see how deep it really was. I got about halfway in my arm, which should have been impossible. The tip should have been poking out of the bottom of my arm, but it didn't. What happened next scared the shit out of me. To pull the straw back out, but it was tugged out of my grasp and into the hole where it disappeared. What the fuck? As I jumped and stared back at my arm, this had to be some sort of fucked up magic trick. My mind couldn't even think of anything else to explain what I just saw. I think I'm going crazy. As I sat there and wondered what I should do, a little metal cylinder slid out of the hole. I just watched as it popped out and then fell onto the table. When it hit the tabletop, it came apart and revealed a rolled up piece of paper nestled inside of the hollow sections. I picked up the paper and unrolled it, which revealed the handwritten note. This is what it was written on it. Hey Colin, I know you have a lot of questions about the hole in your arm. Unfortunately, I can't tell you much. What I can do is apologize for the inconvenience it has caused you, and it will likely continue to cause you. We had a little problem with this experiment we were working on. We didn't know what went wrong, but whatever happened caused this little weird wormhole to open in the mole on my arm that leads to the mole on your arm. Because of this hole, we are now connected across the space and time. I know that sounds really bad, like a plot to a really bad science fiction movie, but I really am you. I just live in another dimension. Don't worry, I am doing everything I can to fix this mistake, and I am confident I can close the wormhole. In the meantime, if you could, please sign your name at the bottom of this note and place it back into the wormhole so the next column gets the message. P.S. Please refrain from sending anything else through the hole. It can create some awkward situations. Also, keep it covered when you bathe. P.S.S. If something living comes through the hole, burn it, or drop it in acid if you can, if you have some available. I picked up a pen and glanced down at the list to look at all the other columns that have signed before me. There must have been over 50 signatures on that sheet so far. Even though each of them had signed Colin, they signed in a different dimension, and the handwriting of each one was very similar. I signed my name at the bottom of the list and placed the sheet of paper back inside the cylinder. Then I picked it up and slid it into the wormhole. As I did so, I wondered how many columns the cylinder would travel to before it made its way back to the first column, or even back to me. Then I thought, what the fuck did he mean by something living? Colin. The sound of my name being called out pulled me from a restless slumber. I looked at the clock and groaned. It was just after 1 a.m. I sat up and rubbed my eyes. Colin. There it is again. It sounded deep and throaty, kind of like a frog. I stopped and peered around my dark bedroom. I thought I was dreaming when I heard it the first time. The second time, it clearly came from somewhere in my room. I reached over and turned on the lamp that sat on my nightstand. Colin. That time it sounded like it came from the closet. As I turned towards the closet doors, it happened to glance down at my arm. I stopped when I noticed a small hole in the bandage I used to cover the wormhole. The opening was ringed with ragged little half-moon shapes and frayed pieces of fabric. It looked like something had chewed its way out. Have you seen a leaf that has been eaten by a caterpillar? That is what my bandage looked like. Seeing the bandage reminded me of that note that came through the wormhole a couple of days earlier. If something living comes through the hole, burn it. Colin. That time it didn't come from the closet. That sounded like it came from the bathroom. Whatever was calling my name seemed to be moving around. The bathroom is on the opposite side of the room from the closet. I stood up and walked to the center of my bedroom and waited for it to happen again. I figured I had better luck pinpointing if I could listen from the central location. When I got up off the bed, I clamped my hand over the hole. I didn't put much thought into that action. I just wanted it to prevent anything else from coming through. While I waited for my name to be called again, I looked down at my hand. Then I imagined something biting its way through the bandage. My hand wasn't probably the best thing to plug the hole. I didn't want something to bite its way through my palm, so I removed my hand. I had no idea what had come through. I let my mind wander over the possibilities. What did it look like? How big was it? What if it were venomous, or worse? What if it were infectious, or harbored parasites? I was starting to get worried. I've seen enough movies to know alien creatures were never a good thing. I ripped the damaged bandage off my arm. Then I scanned the room for something that I could use to cover the wormhole. Then I noticed all of a sudden a spare change that sat on my dresser. I walked over, grabbed a quarter, then walked over to my nightstand, grabbed a roll of duct tape that I kept in the drawer. Colin. I didn't bother to try to pinpoint it. I just wanted to secure my arm first. I placed the quarter over the hole and wrapped my arm in the layer of tape. That should keep anything else from coming through. Unless it could chew through the metal, I thought. Shut up! I chided myself. I needed to focus on finding the thing that had come through. Worrying about what it was capable wasn't going to help me at that moment. I tossed the tape on my bed and returned to the center of my room and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Colin. It was definitely sounding like it was coming from the bathroom. I quickly walked in, turned on the light, and scanned the room, but saw nothing. This was starting to annoy me. The sound was so loud and so clear. Why couldn't I find the thing that was calling my name? I started to move my toiletries around. I opened the cabinet under the sink. I pulled the shower curtain to the side. I even got down on my hands and knees and peered behind the toilet. I could not find anything. I turned and started to walk out of the room. Colin. I nearly shit my pants. I am not kidding. It sounded like someone had came up behind me, leaned over my shoulder, and yelled my name in my ear. I whirled around and gave one of those half-hearted karate swipes, but I only struck air. Then I took a defensive stance and glanced to the right and to the left. That is when I noticed a strange-looking bug on my shoulder. If you've ever seen a cockroach, then you already know what this thing could have looked like. Imagine a standard cockroach, the ones that can fly, that has been stretched to twice its length. It looked a little stockier than a normal roach. Instead of being brown, this bug was off-color white, almost gray. The creepiest thing was that it was semi-translucent. I screamed as I flicked it off my shoulder and it landed onto the floor. Once it landed itself back up, it shuffled its wings, cleaned its head with its front legs, and said, "Colin." Holy shit, it's a talking bug, I thought to myself. Then I remembered the warning and shut the door to prevent it from escaping. The bug cocked its head to the side and it seemed to consider what to make of the giant standing before it. I guess it decided I wasn't a threat because it spread its wings and directly flew at my face. Okay, it may have not been coming right at my face, but it started to fly. That did put me on the defensive and I used my karate chop to swat it out of the air. It was a good chop. I knocked it into the toilet. I walked over and watched it as it flailed around in the water. For a moment, I considered flushing the toilet, but again, I remembered the warning. I shut the lid and ran back into my bedroom and grabbed the lighter out of my pants pocket. I grabbed the empty soda can off my nightstand and returned to the bathroom. My plan was simple. I was going to put that bug in a soda can and set it on fire. To get that bug into the can, I used an old razor I had in the sink. I held the can just above the water and used the razor to guide it into the opening. The bug didn't hesitate when it was given the choice to enter the can or drown. It crawled into the can. When I set the can on the counter, the thing said my name again. Colin. I could feel the can vibrate as the sound reverberated against the aluminum. I quickly shoved a bunch of toilet paper through the opening with enough to stick out so I can light it. Then I lit it. I could hear the bug run around the can as it frantically tried to avoid the flame. After a couple minutes, the fire died down to a few embers of paper, and the bug stopped moving. I shook the can just to make sure it was dead. It didn't make any noise. I dumped the contents of the can into the sink. The bug's legs were curled up close to its charred body. I poked it with my finger. When it didn't move, I picked it up and held it in my palm to get a better look at it. It definitely looked like some weird species of cockroach. As I examined it, I felt a soft pinch in the center of my finger. It wasn't dead, it bit me! I could see it move ever so slightly as I dropped it into the sink and used the bottom of the can to pound it to pulp. Then I picked up the body with a wad of toilet paper and shoved it back into the can. I burned it again. Once the flames went out, I packed it with more toilet paper and burned it a third time. When I looked at the small welt growing where the bug bit me, I started to panic. I convinced myself I was going to die. I cleaned up the wound as well as I could. I washed it, I poured alcohol in it, and then I put on some antibiotic. By the time I was feeling lightheaded, I felt like I was going to pass out. So I crawled back into my bed. Before I knew it, I fell asleep. I woke up around 8 a.m. and sat up quickly as I remembered the events of a few hours ago. I looked down at my hand. The welt was gone, and all that remained was a slight red area that was sore to the touch. I guess I wasn't gonna die. I swung my feet out of the bed and I was going to take a shower when I heard a metallic tapping. I didn't know what to make of it until I realized it was coming from my arm. Something was banging against the coin as it tapped to my arm. I pulled the tape off and removed the coin. As soon as I did, a small metal cylinder popped out of the wormhole. I picked it up and opened it and unrolled the note that was inside. This is what was written on it. To the Colin who sent the bugs through the wormhole, you are a colossal dick. That was not funny. I know you did it intentionally. If those bugs lived in my universe, I totally would have done the same thing. To everyone else, be on the lookout for some long, thin cockroaches. They may have the strange ability to mimic sounds by rubbing their wings together. This particular species seems to be able to mimic the sound of our name. I thought my fucking house was haunted. I hope this note finds you before the roaches do. Don't worry, they are harmless and relatively easy to kill with standard bug spray. Don't try and pick them up. They bite. P.S. Make sure you kill them all. They breed rapidly. That is just like me to pull something like that. I agree with the Colin who wrote the note, but I totally would have done the same thing if the bugs lived in my dimension. As I rolled up the message, placed it back in the tube, and sent it into the wormhole, I wondered just how rapidly the bugs bred. I got my answer when I heard my name called out a dozen times from various locations around my room. It was like seagulls in Finding Nemo, only they were saying Colin instead of mine. Fuck burning them. I caught them all and sent them back. I slid the thick rubber strap back over the opening of the wormhole. I had to remove it to allow the message tube to come through. Once it was back in place, I read the note. At first, it was another joke. The wormhole had become a source of amusement for quite a few Collins. They liked to send random things through it, like the roaches, and I can't wait to see how the other Collins responded. That is why I thought, yeah, right. When I read the first line of the note, when I finished reading it, though quickly replaced with, oh shit. This was written on the note. We are being haunted. There was no greeting. This is how the note actually started. I have received a few messages asking if anyone has seen a strange man in a black suit hanging around. I have seen him. At first I did not know what to make of him. He didn't seem threatening. He would just stand off in the distance and watch me. That changed this morning when he tried to kill me. My advice is to you. If you see him, kill him. If you cannot kill him, run. Do not wait for him to make the first move. You might not live to regret it. Give the numbers of queries that come through. I think it is safe to assume that this is not a single man, but several men with the same appearance. This arrival probably has something to do with what happened to us. I think they may be drawn to the wormhole. If you do not see a man in black yet, it is only a matter of time before one finds you. You need to prepare yourself. If you do not own a weapon, find one. And if a man in black shows up in your dimension, his only goal is to kill you. Stay safe. I am so sorry to cause this. Once you are done reading this, please pass along the note. P.S. These assassins may look like men, but they are not. Do not be fooled by their professional appearance. When you look into one's face, you will see what looks like a human from a distance. Great, I thought. As if things weren't bad enough with all the weird shit that kept popping out of the wormhole, I did not worry about some stalker that seemed to be an interdimensional serial killer. I spent the next couple days constantly looking over my shoulder, searching for a boogeyman in black. Every guy I saw in a dark suit was a potential suspect. I'm sure I made more than one businessman uncomfortable with my scrutiny. There was one guy who seemed to like the attention, but he was way too weird to be an alien. I considered buying a gun, but I couldn't afford one. Plus, I'm not even sure I would be able to shoot someone, even if they were from another dimension or whatever. I opted to carry an old pocket knife instead. My father gave it to me when I was 10. The 6-inch blade was dull and had several nicks, but it would get the job done. 4 days after I received the note, I started to let my guard down. I couldn't keep walking around in constant fear of a man who might never show up. The note was the first and only time I've heard about the man in black. Who knew how many Collins were connected? There could be a million of us, right? So the way I figured it, the chances of a man in black showing up in my dimension were about the same odds of winning the lottery. I was never going to win the lottery, and I figured I'd likely never see the man. Why would he come here? I'm not that special. Yes, I know my assessment for the situation was flawed. I failed to take account that there was an unknown number of men hunting us down, and that we didn't know what they were finding in us. I learned I wasn't good at figuring out odds when I won the Man in Black lottery later that afternoon. The morning of that day was fairly uneventful. Nothing had come through that wormhole. I didn't have any classes. The first time since it appeared in my arm, everything felt normal. It was such a mundane morning, and I was lured into a false sense of security as I got ready for the work that afternoon. As I was about to open my front door and head off to work, I got a strange feeling of vertigo. I felt like I was everywhere, nowhere at the same time. I know that is vague, but that's the only way I can describe it. It lasted for a few seconds, but it troubled me enough to make a stop and lean my hand against the door. I could see a giant rubber band around my arm outstretched and wondered if the wormhole might be what caused this dizzy sensation. Weren't things like that supposed to emit radiation or something? That type of dangerous? No sense of worrying about it now, I thought as I grabbed the knob and opened the door. I'm sure the look I gave when I noticed the man standing on the other side of my door was meme-worthy. I bet yours would have been too if you opened the door face to face with a man in black. Colin was right when he implied the man in black wasn't human. He was pale to the point of being white. He wore a hat to cover his bald head. He was expressionless and completely hairless, and looked too perfect, like it had been manufactured. Even the material of the suit seemed otherworldly. Worst part was his eyes. They looked artificial, the eyes you'd expect to find on a doll. I noticed all of that in the second it took to slam the door and lock it. I wish I was able to afford that gun. I would have never had a problem shooting that creepy fucker. I ran to the back door onto my balcony and I climbed over the railing and lowered myself into it, and I dropped onto the ground. Thankfully, I was dressed for work, so my keys were in my pocket. I ran over to the car and got in and drove off, and I looked in the rear view mirror. I saw the man in black standing on the curb watching me as I drove off. I watched him as he disappeared from my view. I started to wonder if that strange sensation I experienced had anything to do with the appearance. I needed to send a message to the other Collins as soon as possible in case this is what happened. Having some kind of warning, even if it gave us a second to react, that was better than nothing. I drove about an hour outside of town and stopped at a truck stop. I figured I should be far enough away to gather my thoughts. I quickly sent a message telling the other Collins about what I felt right before I saw the man in black. Then I called work and I told them I wasn't feeling well and I needed to take a night off. I did all this while I ate at the diner that was at the truck stop. After weighing all my options, I decided to head to my parents' house and see if I could lay low there and figure out what to do next. As I pulled out of the parking lot and headed back towards the interstate, I saw the man in black as he casually walked down the side of the road. I don't think he noticed me as he continued on his way towards the truck stop. Apparently he could track me. There was no other way to explain how he found me so quickly. I would have let the other Collins know about that. Since I could be tracked, that meant I couldn't go to my parents' house. I didn't want to put them in danger. My only option was to keep driving until I figured something out. That was eventually going to be the problem considering how broke I was. I doubt anyone would let me crash on their couch while I fled a killer. This was one of those times I wish I had a crazy friend who collected weapons during the apocalypse that could possibly be coming. I could use a small arsenal right now. Things went bad to worse a week after I fled the Man in Black. While I was on the run, more and more reports of a strange men started to pop through the wormhole. Thankfully, some of the colonists had sent, though, accounts of how they managed to kill one of them stalking them. Apparently, I'm a bit of a badass in some dimensions. However, I'm not a badass in my own dimension, so it wasn't going to be an easy task for me. The Men in Black could not be stopped by simple means, and that meant guns and knives. You couldn't shoot them. You couldn't stab them in the heart, and you didn't expect them to fall. Their bodies didn't function the way ours did. Injuries that could kill us didn't faze them. The only way to stop them was to dismember them or burn them. That was a prospect I was not looking forward to. I fear that more than one colony may have fallen victim to the Men in Black. A few days earlier, a plume of dark smoke started to pour out of the wormhole. The smoke was so thick I had to pull over and wait for it to stop and clear out my car. Normally, the smell of cooked meat would make my mouth water, but it was accompanied by the smoke that made me queasy. My car still reeks like a steakhouse, not in a good way. I started to drive with the windows down after that. The smoke wasn't as bad as what came through the wormhole the next night. It happened when I was driving. I had one arm on the steering wheel and another arm on the gear shift when my arm started to feel wet. I assumed it was just water. When I glanced down and saw what it really was, I slammed on the brakes and I almost got rear-ended by a driver behind me. It wasn't water, what I saw. It was blood. There was enough coming through that it started to seep out under the thick rubber strap that covered the hole. I recovered my wits and drove to the next exit and pulled over to a fast food restaurant. I ran over to the bathroom and pulled the band off. There was so much blood coming out that you thought I would have punctured an artery. I held my arm under the water until the blood flow slowed and then stopped altogether. I grabbed a paper towel to dry my arm, but stopped as something else had come through the wormhole. I couldn't identify it at first, but it was enough of it had spurted out and I recognized the meaty flesh it was. I immediately started to gag. I was able to keep myself from throwing up until pieces of bone and bits of hair started to come through. I barely made it to the toilet before I hurled my guts out. I didn't care that I was hugging the bowl of a public toilet. Pieces of what I assumed were another colon just came through a wormhole like ground beef from a grinder. That was the worst than anything could be on a toilet. Just thinking about it as I write this makes me nauseous. I sat and hugged the bowl for an eternity. I know I pissed off at least one customer who wanted to use the toilet, but I wasn't going to get up until I was good and ready to go. After I cleaned out the vomit out of my nose and off my chin, I went about the task of cleaning up the pieces of colon that had come through. Most of them were on the floor next to the toilet. They continued to ooze as I puked up everything I had eaten that day. I managed to clean it up all without throwing up, but only through sheer force of will. As I walked out of the bathroom, I decided someone was going to pay for that, and I guess who I had in mind. I sat in the car, took stock of everything I had with me that I could use as a weapon. I had my pocket knife, but other colons said that it was an ineffective weapon. I had my car, I could use it to run the bastard over. I had my lighter, I could set him on fire. If I had an accelerant, I also had a tire iron in the trunk. That had the same problem as the knife. I could use it, but it wouldn't damage him fast enough. To make matters worse, I only had a quarter of gas left in my tank, and I was only down to $5. Even if I hadn't decided to confront the man in black, I would have been forced to face him sooner rather than later, frustrated that I couldn't go back on the interstate and drive. I wasn't thinking straight. I went back on the interstate and drove. I got about 5 miles down the road before my car started pulling to the left. I didn't know how far it was to the next exit, so I pulled over to the shoulder and got out and checked what was wrong. Fuck me, I thought as I noticed my front tire was flat and I didn't have a spare. I looked up on the road and then back the way I came. I could walk forward and hope that there was an exit, or and I could walk back to the exit I just left. It was a tough call, so I flipped a coin. Heads I go forward, tails I go back. It landed on tails. I popped the trunk, grabbed the tire iron, and I wanted to at least be able to defend myself. I grabbed the tire iron and I looked over at the band on my forearm. Nothing had come through since the bathroom incident. It seemed ominous, and it got me thinking about some of the messages that had been sent earlier. The news spread about the Man in Black all over the colonies. Were sending out theories about who they were and what they wanted. Most of them were ridiculous, but 2 of them stuck out as possible to me. The first one proposed that the Men in Black were some entity whose function is to maintain the balance and order of chaos in the universe. When the wormhole that bound the colonies together was created, it likely tipped the universe balance towards chaos. In order to restore the balance, we must be eliminated. The second theory was proposed that the wormhole was not an accident. It was instead a deliberate act of design and to tether all colonies together. It would make it easier to track through dimensional space and therefore easier to kill. The big question here is why? None of the colonies had a good answer to the question except something to erase us from the universe. Both theories had one thing in common. The Men in Black wanted us dead. That meant they were probably not going to stop trying to kill us. In other words, if I kill one of the stalking me right now, there's a good chance another one will show and take his place. Our only hope is that if Colin, that created the wormhole, was able to close it somehow. I mulled all these thoughts back into my head as I walked back to the exit. I must have walked about 2 miles before I saw a silhouette of a man in black in the distance walking toward me. I guess it's time, I thought to myself as I tightened my grip on that tire iron. The stretch of the interstate I was on was dead. I hadn't seen another car in over 30 minutes, so I didn't expect anyone to stop and help me. Even if they did, they'd probably try to help the man in black since he was dressed in a suit and looked respectable businessman. At least from a distance he did. I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that hadn't been washed for a week. He was about 100 yards away. I stopped and waited for him to close the distance. As I stood there, I noticed a large chunk of asphalt sitting on the ground. I picked it up, weighed it in my hand. As he came within throwing distance, I chucked it at him. I hit him on the shoulder and he just kept walking. He stopped when he got about 6 feet away from me, then reached into his jacket, pulled a strange-looking device. I held the tire iron up and ready to swing it at any moment as he made his move. He took 1 step at me. I fidgeted and raised the tire iron a little higher. He opened the device and it looked like some sort of metallic cuff. He took another step towards me. He was now within striking distance and he didn't seem concerned about my threatening posture. I swung the tire iron and struck him on the side of the head. All it did was knock his hat off. It made him turn his head to the side. He then reached out with his free hand and grabbed me by the throat and lifted me off the ground. I dropped the tire iron and tried to pry his fingers loose as I started to choke. His grip was like a vice. The entire time this man in black didn't make a sound or show any expression. I don't think he even blinked. I flailed around as he tried to place the metallic device on the arm with the wormhole, and I started to lose consciousness with it, the strength to fight. In desperation, I reached into my pocket, pulled out a pocket knife, and flipped the switchblade open. And right as he snapped the thing on my arm, I lashed out the knife and felt the blade pierce the device and then sink into my arm. The flash of the light and the weird sensation of being everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Then I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was lying on the carpeted floor. My head was pounding. I tried to open my eyes, but the room was too bright. All I could do was squint. I stayed on the floor until my vision grew accustomed to the light. Then I sat up and leaned on my back against the bed that was next to me. I was in a large, spacious room filled with a bunch of futuristic-looking furniture and electronics. Even if lamps on nightstands looked like they belonged on the moon base. Everything looked so polished and shiny. The coolest thing in the room was that a large flat screen that sat on top of the dresser. I later discovered it was a television, which was a shock considering that the TVs in my dimension were huge boxes that sat on the floor. I had to adjust my way as I sat on the floor because something in my back pocket was pressing uncomfortably against my butt cheek. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a small rectangular electronic device. I held it up to the screen and lit it up. Several small icons arranged in rows. I didn't know what half of them were. I could easily tell it was some sort of communication device. That is when I happened to look down and notice I was wearing different clothes. When I struggled with the man in black, I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. Now I was wearing black slacks, a long sleeve gray polo shirt. They look expensive. Actually, everything in this bedroom looked like luxury items. Probably cost way more than I made in a year. I stood up on shaky legs and went to find the bathroom. I had to take it slow to keep the pounding in my head to a minimum. The first door I tried to open was a closet. The second one was a hallway. I walked in the hall until I found a bathroom. As I stood before the mirror, I stared in shock at my reflection. It looked different. I still looked like me, but my hair was shorter and my style was different. I was clean, shaved. When I was on the run, I was several days and started growing a beard, and I was needing a haircut. Colin. I jumped at the familiar sound. I walked out of the bathroom towards the front of what appeared to be an apartment. As I stepped out of the hall, I heard my name being called again. It sounded like it came from the kitchen. I walked to the corner and let the archway that led into the kitchen. The first thing I noticed was a large glass jar sitting on the counter. In the jar, there was a large stick, a cookie, and a Colin roach. I approached the jar, and the roach climbed up to the stick and fluttered its wing and said, "Colin." Everything I experienced since I woke up had been dreamlike. I started to wonder if the man in black really had killed me or this was my afterlife or something. I felt like I was stuck in a dream. I feel unconscious. I soon discovered it was much worse than any of those things. My mouth was incredibly dry, so I walked over to the refrigerator to see if I could find something to drink. I opened the door and I didn't recognize a single product of any of the shelves. I grabbed something called Coca-Cola and I popped it open. I was happy to discover when the carbonated drink and gulped it down. 2 of them actually, in rapid succession. I drank the soda and I peered around the room. I noticed a stack of magazines and I walked over, picked one up. I didn't recognize the title of the celebrity pictured on the cover. When I saw the date, I started to piece together what I finally thought had happened. I looked different. I was surrounded by futuristic technology. I didn't recognize any of the products in the fridge. There was a Colin roach in the jar on the counter, and the date of the magazine was almost 50 years in the future. Since I knew multiple versions of me existed, the only explanation is that I had switched places with a different Colin from a different dimension. When I plunged the knife into my device, I must have malfunctioned and swapped my conscious or soul, or whatever you might call it, with a Colin in this dimension. I could only imagine what horrible end the other Colin met with the hands of the man in black. As I walked out of the kitchen, I accidentally banged my arm against one of those dining chairs. When my arm hit the wood, there was a loud thud. When I first awoke on the floor, I thought the pressure of my forearm was the rubber strap I used to climb over the wormhole. I shouldn't have made a thud like that. I stopped and slowly rolled up the sleeve of my shirt to reveal a metallic device clamped to my forearm. There was an opening to the device where the area was wounded, where the wormhole was. It looked very similar to the one the man in black placed on me before I passed that, but this one seemed to have been extensively modified. I considered taking the device off, but decided it wouldn't be a good idea. I didn't know what would happen. I could be the only thing that kept me tethered to this Colin's body. If I took it off, it might be sent to a different dimension, or back to my dimension. If that happened, I might be returning back to a dead body, so I couldn't take this thing off. The only thing is, the Colin that swapped with me must have already died with my body. That meant the two of us would die if I took the device off. Plus, I was almost positive I saw what was arranged on the dining room table that I had become the Colin that created the wormhole. The table was filled with several tools and electronic components, along with several message tubes. Along on the table was the first note I received through the wormhole, the one I signed my name to. As I looked to the list of several names, some of them had been crossed off. I didn't think that this Colin just wanted to say hi when he was sending the note through. I think he wanted to see how extensive the Colin network was. He wanted to keep us from looking for help by acting if he was one of us. That was going to fix it. I think this device was stolen and modified. Colin somehow figured out how to modify and use it, probably with help since the original note said we and not I. But why? Why would he go through all this trouble to just try to connect us? Obviously the men in black were not happy about it. The Colin from this dimension was the one they were looking for. They were willing to kill us all just to get to him, and he knew this. I guess you really can't trust yourself. I sat down at the table to think. I could potentially close the wormhole at all costs of my own life. I couldn't do that. I'd like for everyone to think that I was a hero, but I didn't want to die. Plus, there was no guarantee that the other Collins wouldn't return to this body and continue whatever they were doing. I needed to learn more about this device and see if I can fix the damage that had been caused. I've been spent the past week hiding in this apartment as I figured out how to use Colin's television, phone, and computer. I hoped it would be helpful to find information about what he was up to, but I couldn't find anything useful. This is why I posted my story. I need help. I think someone out there helped Colin. I need to find that person. If you know Colin, or you are the person that helped him, please contact me. We need to stop whatever that this has been started. Whatever he was doing that was so important to him, that he was willing to risk all just to accomplish for us. This is my last update for the foreseeable future. I have told you everything I know for now. I have sent copies of this story through the wormhole so that the Colin Collective knows the truth. If anything else develops, you will be the first one to know.